Welcome to Green Drinks. My name is Ginevra Wetmore. I am the program director here at Sustainable Woodstock. We are a nonprofit. We are founded in 2009, and we do environmental action, education, advocacy, building on Woodstock's legacy as the birthplace of the modern conservation movement. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you, Dave. David Roberts, is a managing consultant at VEIC with over 25 years of transportation sustainability program experience. Over the past 11 years, he has coordinated the Drive Electric Vermont program, a public-private partnership working to increase electrified transportation in Vermont. He supports programs to increase dealer awareness and consumer sales of plug-in vehicles and has worked with utilities, government agencies, and other organizations to increase availability of charging infrastructure across the state. He is on his fourth EV and loves quiet explorations of Vermont backroads with his wife and their dog Juniper. So thank you very much for joining us, Dave, and I'm going to hand it off to you.
Great. Thanks, Ginevra, for organizing this. Always great to join the Sustainable Woodstock group. I think this might be the third time I've been in one of your Green Drink sessions, so really happy to be here. And so you heard just a little bit about Drive Electric Vermont. It's a public-private partnership coordinated by VEIC, where I work. It's a nonprofit. We're based in Winooski. We also operate Efficiency Vermont, for those who are familiar with the statewide, except for the city of Burlington, energy efficiency program, and doing a lot of work to get the word out about electric vehicles. We've got a website with a lot of great resources. I'll show some of those in our time this evening, but if you haven't been to the website and you have an interest in electric cars, definitely check it out. So I've got about 30 minutes worth of slides. I'll be moving fairly quickly to just try to hit some of the highlights to provide folks who maybe don't have a lot of experience with EVs, some of the sort of most commonly asked questions and some of the information that we think is really critical for anybody who's considering an EV for their next car. I look forward to questions and discussion at the end of that. And as Ginevra mentioned, she does have a PDF of the slides that she'll be sharing to everyone who's signed up, so you don't need to worry about taking notes and things like that if you just want to use the slides. So a little bit, some of the key reasons we think going electric is great for your transportation needs. So saving money, you can save significantly on fuel and maintenance costs compared to gasoline vehicles with an EV. And reduce emissions, which is great from a policy perspective and for those who are concerned about sustainability. They actually are great cars to drive. If you haven't had the chance to get behind the wheel of one, I encourage you to go for a test drive, or maybe a friend who has one will take you for a ride. They really are a lot of fun to drive. They're quiet. You can listen to music, have a conversation. And for most folks in Vermont, you can charge them at home, which is very convenient. It's kind of like a cell phone experience. You just plug it in when you get home and it should be ready to go in the morning. For those who maybe are in condos or apartments, it can be more complicated. I'd be happy to discuss those situations in more detail in the Q&A. But there are some state funding programs that can help people in that situation to get charging installed. So I mentioned reducing emissions. Transportation is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont. It's about 36% of the total. It's just about tied with residential commercial energy use as of the most recent greenhouse gas inventory for 2020. And of course, 2020 was the year that we had a lot of COVID situation, so much less driving that has since rebounded some. So probably when we start seeing state greenhouse gas inventories for 2021 and later years, we'll see transportation notching up at least a little bit, but it is one of the largest sources. And most of our transportation emissions in Vermont come from light duty vehicles, passenger cars and trucks that, are the day-to-day drivers that we all use. Electric vehicles are not the panacea to all of our transportation emission concerns. So reducing vehicle travel, walking, bicycling, using public transportation are the best ways to reduce transportation emissions. But in a rural state like Vermont, many people are challenged to access those options. So EVs do have a significant reduction in emissions, even considering the battery manufacturing and upstream emissions of where electricity is coming from. So this is a chart from a study done by the International Council for Clean Transportation, which is saying basically the average all-electric vehicle can reduce emissions in the average sort of US state in terms of the electric generation sources by 60 to 70%. And if you're powering that EV with 100% renewable energy, that can get you to an 80% reduction compared to a gasoline vehicle. So very significant reduction, but always need to keep in mind some of the other transportation options that are really critical to reducing those emissions. So two basic types of plug-in electric vehicles. So we've got your all-electric vehicles powered solely by the battery. Earlier EVs, 10 years ago, maybe some of them only got about 70 miles of official range, but these days there are some models that have over 400 miles of range on a single charge of the battery. When the battery is depleted, you have to plug it in somewhere to get it charged up again. The other option is a plug-in hybrid, which typically has a smaller battery, so a lower electric range, anywhere from 15 to 80 miles on the battery, but then it still has a gasoline engine that can go 300 miles or more. So for folks who are maybe on the fence about getting an all-electric vehicle or concerned about long distance travel and where they can charge, plug-in hybrid oftentimes is a convenient option. And a lot of people who start with plug-in hybrids eventually go to an all-electric as they kind of figure out what works best for them. In Vermont, plug-in hybrids are just under half of the total registered EVs. And as of July of this year, we've got about 10,000 registered all-electric and plug-in hybrids in the state. Some of the more popular models shown here tend to be some of the more affordable options. So on the left are some of the most popular all-electric models. The Chevrolet Bolt starts at about $27,000. Gets 260 miles of official range on a charge, although less in winter, and I'll talk a little more about that in a few slides. The Tesla Model 3, which has an option for all-wheel drive. The Nissan Leaf has been around for quite a while. It's another one of the more affordable options. On the right, we've got some of the plug-in hybrid options. So the Toyota Prius Prime has a 39-mile electric range, and then 550 miles if you're combining a full battery with a full tank of gas. So that's sort of the second number there is the total range, including the gasoline. And also on here are just some miles per gallon equivalent efficiency numbers. So this is basically if you convert the amount of energy in a gallon of gasoline to electrical equivalent, this is where you end up in terms of the efficiency of these vehicles. So obviously much more efficient than basically any internal combustion engine vehicle when you see 80 miles per gallon to over 130 miles per gallon equivalent. Hyundai Tucson plug-in hybrid, this is an all-wheel drive option. Toyota RAV4 Prime, also all-wheel drive. We know a lot of Vermonters are looking for all-wheel drive when they're shopping for vehicles. So there certainly are more options today than there have been in prior years to have different types, different shapes, drivetrains, all-wheel drive, all of that stuff. And here are a couple other the more recent models. All of these offer all-wheel drives, either standard or optional feature on the vehicles. And you can see, a lot of these vehicles well over 200 miles, over 300 miles in some cases. So, a lot more to choose from. We've got a great resource on the Drive Electric Vermont website. It's under, we call it the vehicle comparison tool, and it basically shows all the EVs that are currently available for sale in the state of Vermont. You can filter for all electric or plug-in hybrid, filter if you want all-wheel drive as standard or an optional feature, some of the other things. So it just gives you sort of a quick way to look and see, which models might work for you, and get some basic price information. And then there are links off to the manufacturer websites so you can learn more about those particular models and where they might be available in Vermont. We've also got some other electric options happening in the state, just worth mentioning in passing. There are electric buses, school and transit buses operating in the state already, and anticipate many more in the coming years. Starting to see some commercial fleet vehicles like cargo vans and pickup trucks. We've got CarShare Vermont in the Burlington area offering a number of EVs in their fleet. Electric lawn care equipment options, and actually know probably most folks joining this call in the Woodstock area are Green Mountain Power customers, and GMP does have some incentives for electric lawn care equipment you could check out if you're interested. There are electric bicycles that are a great fit for a lot of things, including electric cargo bikes that can really carry quite a bit if you're going to the store or carrying kids and things like that. And there is a state e-bike incentive program as well as utility e-bike incentives. The state program funding is nearly depleted, so if you're interested in taking advantage of that, I encourage you to go to the Drive Electric Vermont website under the state incentives and get your application in as soon as possible. And there are also electric motorcycles out there, so lots of electric options, even electric snowmobiles. They didn't make the cut for the slide, but starting to see snowmobiles and utility vehicles going electric. So I mentioned you won't see the official automaker range estimates in really cold winter conditions. And we typically advise folks that the worst case scenario you would see in Vermont is about half of the official range estimate. And that's like a night where it's maybe 20 below Fahrenheit. The vehicle's outside, you don't have a garage, and you're going out in the morning and it's sort of a cold start. You might see half of that automaker estimate. It can vary depending on the vehicle. Some vehicles are not as impacted. There are different battery chemistries that automakers use, so sometimes those chemistries have a little more resilience in cold temperatures. But we do recommend, if you're concerned about your range in winter, there are many vehicles will offer a cold weather option package, so we really encourage that typically they include heated seats and steering wheels, and if a heat pump is available, that will often be part of the package. And heat pumps are just more efficient heating systems, and using the cabin heat is not as efficient as using heated seats and steering wheels. So, start with the heated seats and steering wheels if you can. If you've got a heat pump, then the cabin heat is better. If many EVs don't have heat pumps available, and you could still use the cabin heat certainly, but just know that it will impact the range. So if you're on a long distance trip, you might want to be a little more cognizant of how much heat you're using and how that's impacting the battery. For most people, if you have one of the newer all-electric vehicles or any plug-in hybrid, but an all-electric vehicle that has over 200 miles of range, you still have well over 100 miles on a winter day. It's enough for most Vermonters' sort of daily needs, certainly. But again, if you're doing long distance travel, it's more of a concern. You can drive a little bit slower, particularly if you're driving on the interstate at 70, 75 miles per hour, slowing down to 65 or even a little bit slower, maybe taking an alternate route you can drive slower more comfortably. That will really benefit you in terms of the amount of range that you can get. Just reduced aerodynamic drag on the vehicle creates a real benefit. Some other considerations to think about for winter conditions. Many vehicles will have slower fast charging in winter. So I'll talk a little more about fast charging in a few, but basically, some vehicles, the batteries, when they're cold, they can't accept a charge as quickly, so that can slow down your fast charging. Some manufacturers are starting to preheat or precondition the battery packs when the vehicle knows you're navigating to a fast charger. So if you're doing longer distance travel regularly in winter, you might look for a vehicle that offers that. And hopefully in the next 5 or so years, we'll start seeing some new battery technologies that won't be as impacted by the cold weather is the lithium ion cells that most automakers currently use. There's a link at the bottom of the slide that has a lot more information on sort of model specific characteristics, such as which vehicles have heat pumps, and links to more information for anybody who wants to dive into this further. So we've got, I mentioned some of the cost savings potential. So this is just a slide comparing average monthly transportation energy costs for someone in Vermont on gasoline, which is this sort of upper chart here, upper line, versus the average Vermont electric rate, which is the green line. And, you know, Vermont electric rates, they do tend to go up somewhat over time. There are some inflationary pressures, but they're much more stable. They're regulated, so they're much more stable than gasoline prices, which are not regulated and subject to whatever market conditions are going on. So we know, you know, there was a dip in gasoline prices during COVID when people weren't driving, but since then prices have gone back up to sort of pre-COVID and beyond. And someone driving an electric vehicle versus the gasoline prices that we see in Vermont would have saved about $2,800 over the last 5 years. And those savings could have been significantly higher if they were on an off-peak EV rate, which many Vermont utilities, including Green Mountain Power, offer EV rates. In terms of a dollar equivalent per gallon of gasoline, we tend to say it's around $1.50 a gallon equivalent for traveling in an EV. It's currently on the average Vermont electric rate, it's about $1.60 a gallon. But if you're on an off-peak rate, like what GMP offers, is closer to $1.10 a gallon gasoline, going off some of the sort of average efficiency numbers that are applicable to Vermonters. And in addition to those fuel savings, you can save quite a bit on maintenance. So, you know, even factoring in some of the depreciation that happens with EVs, Consumer Reports has looked into this and found that total cost of ownership savings for most EVs is $6,000 to $10,000 over the life of the vehicle. And that's before factoring in a number of the incentives available to Vermonters that I'll talk more about. So looking at charging, most people charge at home overnight. That's the most convenient, lowest cost place to do it. A number of Vermont workplaces are getting charging installed, and there is a state program to support that right now. So if your workplace has been thinking about putting in charging, but the cost has been a barrier, definitely check out that state program, VermontEVchargers.com. And then there's public charging, which is something that most EV drivers don't use all the time, but if you're on a long distance trip, you know, or away from home, or maybe there's a power outage, you're going to be relying on that public charging. And so it's important for there to be a robust availability and reliability of that public charging infrastructure. And when we talk about charging, there's 3 different levels of charging. So level 1 charging just plugs into a standard home outlet. Most EVs will come with a charger that looks like this one. And you'll get about 5 miles of range per hour of charging. So it's pretty slow. It can be a good fit for plug-in hybrid owners because that'll still give you a full charge overnight for pretty much any plug-in hybrid. If you have an all-electric vehicle and you're driving maybe 40 miles or less a day, you can get by with level 1 charging in most instances, but certainly more convenient to step up to a level 2 charger, which is 240 volts, like an electric clothes dryer type of circuit. And that will give you 10 to 20 miles of range per hour charging, a little bit more in some circumstances. This is sort of more like a very basic home charger that you might see. And the level 2 here on the right middle is more like a public charger. And this one can charge 2 vehicles at once and accept payments, and you know, it's just a much more robust system for public charging. On the right, we've got DC fast charging. This is a much higher powered, much more expensive to install, so not something a typical workplace or employer would want to be taking on. It'll provide up to 1,000 miles of range per hour of charging. So, you know, much more convenient if you're just trying to make a quick stop. Most EVs, they'll say it'll give you an 80% charge in about 30 minutes, depending on your EV and the charger. On the bottom of the slide, we've got some information on some of the different plug types that are out there. So most automakers historically have been using this, it's called a J1772 connector. It's a Society of Automotive Engineers standard. And then Tesla has had their own plug connector, which is now called the North American Charging Standard, or NACS. And a number of automakers are looking at how to access more reliable public charging and realizing that Tesla has really got quite a lead in that regard. And they have announced that they'll be switching to that Tesla charging plug with their 2025 vehicles. So Ford, General Motors, Nissan, Honda, Acura, Volvo, all of them have announced that they'll be transitioning to this NACS standard in 2025. In the meantime, they will be making adapters more widely available, so I wouldn't worry too much about it because of the coming advent of adapters, but want to make sure people are aware that this change is happening and it might impact you if you're driving an EV already or looking to get one. And just to kind of provide a more graphic depiction of the different charging times, level 1, much slower for sort of a typical, this is 60 kilowatt hours. So this would be like a Chevrolet Bolt battery, which provides sort of typical range of about 250 miles. So a long time on level 1, still, overnight on level 2. And then for fast charging, you can have different fast charging power depending on the equipment. And if your vehicle can accept that power, you can really get a much faster charge as shown here. So down to 10 minutes. And this, only a few vehicles are capable of accepting that highest DC fast charging power right now. So the Kia and Hyundai EVs in particular are sort of known for being able to accept that really fast charging power. But we'll see more of that in the future. Vermont does have pretty good availability of public charging. This is a map from a website called plugshare.com. Plugshare is a great resource for EV drivers to learn about where charging is available. The orange locations are fast chargers, green are level 2. There's also a smartphone app that I highly recommend. This is the Tesla Supercharger network. I mentioned, with Tesla making deals with some of the other automakers, this network will be opening up for a number of other drivers over the next 2 years. So, but if you're looking to buy an EV tomorrow and you want to do a lot of long distance traveling, there's really no denying the great convenience that Tesla owners enjoy with accessing this network. There are plans for the state of Vermont to fund a number of additional fast chargers across the state. There are 17 locations currently under contract, as shown here. Some of these are getting built out. I know Ludlow is in place, although may have been impacted a bit by recent flooding, unfortunately. But this, hopefully, all of these will be in the ground in the next year or so. And in addition to those, the state has designated a number of corridors as federally supported alternative fuel corridors, and those are shown on this map. It's basically all of the interstates and Route 7 south of Burlington, Route 2 east of Montpelier, and Route 9 across southern Vermont. So these federal EV corridors will be getting high-powered fast chargers within every 50 miles of the next one. And this is part of a larger national network that's sort of a snapshot shown here. So it's not the intention is that this is going to enable really national and international travel for EV drivers as these federal funds get in the ground. In terms of paying for public charging, it is more expensive typically to use public charging than to charge at home. There's no standard pricing. It's set by the host location or operator. It's usually around 20 cents per kilowatt hour or about $1 an hour for level 2 charging. So that's a little bit more than what you'd be paying for home charging for level 2. But fast charging can be significantly more expensive. 30 to 40 cents per kilowatt hour might be typical, about $20 per session. So it can be more than you would spend on sort of comparable travel on gasoline. So for most folks, we definitely don't recommend that you really rely on fast charging for your daily travel. It's more of a every now and then when you're on a long distance trip, you'll be using it, but you don't want to use it all the time. There are a number of charging networks that operate these public chargers and handle the payment systems. So we've got a list on the Drive Electric Vermont public charging page that provides more information. There is a system called Plug and Charge, where you just plug in the vehicle and it automatically recognizes who you are and it's connected to your credit card and sort of automatically processes the payment. And that's the way Teslas operate today. And some other automakers are coming up to speed on that. And hopefully we'll see more in the future, just, much more convenient. But in the meantime, there are, as shown on the bottom of the slide, a number of options for folks trying to access public charging. And it's going to vary from one location to the next, but almost every location, if they do require payment, will have a phone number you can call. So if you're not already connected with them or with another network that has a roaming agreement with them, you can call their phone support, give them your credit card information. They can turn on the charging remotely. The state of Vermont has required for some of their state-funded locations that they include fast charging locations in particular, that they include a credit card, a more traditional credit card reader like you would see at a gas pump kind of situation, just because they know that some of these other options might be a little harder for some folks to access. If you are planning to do any long distance travel in your EV, it is worth doing a little bit of planning in advance. So especially if you're not in a Tesla and you're going to be relying on the non-Tesla public fast charging network. And I mentioned PlugShare. PlugShare does have a trip planning feature that's linked here on this slide. And that is really handy to show you sort of fast charging that you could access along a route. So this is somebody driving from Burlington to New York City. It's filtered to just show some of the higher powered fast chargers along that route. And it's as you click on these locations, you can look and see maybe there's an announcement or an issue. So in this instance, this a couple of years ago, Electrify America was saying there was a problem at this location with one of the fast charging plugs. So you'd want to know that and have a plan B before setting out on your trip. So PlugShare is really handy for folks looking to do a long distance trip. So on the incentive side, we know that the upfront cost of EVs can be a little bit higher than, well, the upfront cost for any new vehicle these days, actually, the prices have really gone up. If you haven't shopped for a vehicle in a couple of years, you'll be unpleasantly surprised. I think it's safe to say. But EVs do tend to have a little bit more of a upfront premium cost compared to gasoline vehicles because of the expense of the batteries and other components. So incentives are a key way that the federal government, state, and electric utility are all sort of working to be able to stack incentives to make them more affordable. There's a federal tax credit. It's up to $7,500 for new vehicles or up to $4,000 for used vehicles. It is a tax credit, so it's something you have to claim on your income taxes unless you're leasing the vehicle, in which case the leasing company technically owns the vehicle and can pass through that credit as part of a lease deal. There is a provision in the Inflation Reduction Act that will be effective starting in January of 2024 that will allow dealers to pass through that federal tax credit at the point of sale. So we're really excited about that. It should make this a lot more accessible for folks, including those who maybe don't have a huge tax liability. Because right now, if you don't have a tax liability when you do your income tax return, you may not see the full benefit of this credit. It's not a refundable credit. and it does not carry over into future years. So there are some income eligibility requirements. We've got a lot more information on the Drive Electric website linked below. The state offers incentives. It's actually, need to update this slide. I see it's up to $5,000 now as of July. And for new EV, new all-electric or plug-in hybrid EV, there's also a used EV incentive program called Mileage Smart that offers 25% of the purchase price up to $5,000. And there's also the Replace Your Ride incentive that offers up to $5,000 if you have a 10-year-old or older car, gasoline car that you scrapped as part of the deal. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about Replace Your Ride because there are some interesting elements about additional elements to that beyond just electric vehicles. And then most electric utilities in Vermont do offer pretty significant incentives. Green Mountain Power in the Woodstock area is over $2,000 for an all-electric vehicle, a little bit higher incentive if you're lower income, and a little bit lower if you're looking at a plug-in hybrid or used EV option. So I mentioned Replace Your Ride. It's $2,500 to $5,000, depending on your income. If you're scrapping an older vehicle, it can stack with a new EV purchase at a participating dealer, a used EV with the Mileage Smart program at a participating dealer, or there's a third option where you can just scrap the vehicle and not get a car. You get a prepaid clean mobility debit card that can be used to purchase a bike, an electric bike, to go toward your car share member fees, to use public transit. So there are a number of participating retailers or providers that have signed up to support that clean mobility Replace Your Ride program, and there's more information on it on the Drive Electric site. Also wanted to mention for anyone who maybe has a flood damaged vehicle from recent flooding or knows somebody who does, you can let them know that there is an additional $1,000 incentive for somebody getting a new electric vehicle. If you're looking at a used EV, instead of the 25% up to $5,000, it's just an automatic $5,000. And for Replace Your Ride, there's a waiver of some of the vehicle operability requirements. So if the vehicle was totaled due to flooding, you can still turn in that 10-year-old or older vehicle and get the value of the Replace Your Ride incentive. So what these all sort of stack up to is, bringing the price of a new or used EV down considerably. So this is a table showing for a new Chevrolet Bolt for someone who's eligible for sort of the standard incentive amounts. And then on the right side is a lower income Vermonters eligible for some of the higher incentives. So adding all these up, including the Replace Your Ride incentive, if somebody was eligible for that, you could be looking at a brand new Chevrolet Bolt as low as about $12,000 for the standard incentive, or about $6,000 for the lower income enhanced incentives. That does reflect this tax credit amount that particularly a lower income person may have some real challenges accessing a full $7,500 federal tax credit. On the used side, there are some deals out there. Can be a little bit hard to find used EVs though. A lot of dealers have very limited supply, but they are out there. And there is now the federal tax credit available. The Mileage Smart program is only open to some of the lower income Vermonters. But theoretically, you could basically get a used EV for nothing if you can find a reasonable deal on a used EV in those lower income groups. We've got a tool that can help people make sense of all these incentives called the Incentive Calculator on the Drive Electric Vermont website. And I just want to bring that up quickly here to give folks, so if you're on the driveelectricvt.com homepage, you can go under incentives. There's a link here to the incentive calculator. And once you're on this page, you can tell this tool your utility. So I'll say Green Mountain Power. I'm looking at a new all-electric vehicle. I'm looking at a Chevrolet. I am married filing jointly. maybe my income is 75 to 90,000. And so this will give you an estimate of your utility incentive, the state incentive that would apply, and the federal tax credit that might be available. So not every vehicle is eligible for all of these incentives. There are price caps, and on the federal side, there are some manufacturing requirements that are out there. So I see in the chat somebody is saying federal tax credits only apply to North American made vehicles. That's correct for a purchase. If you're leasing an EV, the leasing company can qualify under the commercial clean vehicle tax credit, which doesn't require the North American production. So you see Nissan, Kia, Hyundai, and Subaru, perhaps other automakers are now starting to offer passing through a very significant lease incentive that really reflects the value of that credit. So if your appetite is whetted and you're interested in learning more about EVs and maybe getting behind the wheel of one, there are several events coming up in Vermont or nearby that are part of National Drive Electric Week. So those are shown here. Call out the Upper Valley EV Expo in Lebanon. There's a lot of Vermonters that will head to that. They usually sort of do it in Vermont one year and New Hampshire the other year. So that's a great event. Usually a lot of local EV drivers who can share their experience with different models. So encourage folks to attend one of those events if you're interested in learning more. So I'm ready for some Q&A here. So I look forward, I see there's some in the chat. So Ginevra, I'll look forward to you helping guide us through this.
Thanks so much, Dave. Is that your dog?
Yes.
So cute. Yeah, thank you so much. I learned, seems every time we have a presentation from you, there are always a lot of updates to cover actually, which is great. So there's always a lot to learn. And I know folks have been posting in the chat here with questions, so please feel free to continue doing that. And I'll just get us started by reading those off to you if that sounds good.
Great.
Are there any EVs that offer good ground clearance?
There are. EVs do tend to have less ground clearance than most gasoline vehicles because of the improved aerodynamics. So they're not, they're made for sort of California conditions, if you will. But there are some that have a little bit more, and there are, I've got the list here of, this is the vehicle comparison tool. I said I wanted to look at vehicles that have standard all-wheel drive. And so, we've got the Jeep Wrangler plug-in hybrid, Jeep Grand Cherokee, Hyundai Tucson, so you've got the Ford F-150 Lightning. They do tend to cost a little bit more, but there are some options that are a little more affordable. And if you're thinking about a lease that can roll in some of the incentives, it can be more attractive. So, definitely if you're on a gravel road or have subject to mud season conditions in Vermont, you definitely want to pay attention to the ground clearance. But there are some options out there that should work for at least most folks in Vermont.
So you recommend people go on this comparison tool and then do the all-wheel drive cars to take a look?
Yep.
Thank you. You did reference this, but I'm going to ask it again to make sure I understood. So the question is, the federal tax credits only apply to North American made vehicles, right? How about the state and/or utility credits?
Yes, so the federal tax credits only apply to North American made vehicles if you're purchasing it. There are no domestic or North American production requirements for state or utility credits, but there are some price cap requirements. So for the state incentives, the base MSRP manufacturer's suggested retail price needs to be $50,000 or less to be eligible for a state of Vermont incentive. And then some utilities do have price caps on the purchase price of the vehicle. You need to check with the utility directly to confirm any details there, but it's more than the state incentive 50,000 cap in every circumstance I can think of right now. The little bit of a workaround for the federal tax credit issue for North American production is what I mentioned with leasing. So technically, a leasing company can qualify as a commercial entity, so they can get the commercial clean vehicle tax credit, which doesn't have the North American production requirement, which allows them to claim that credit themselves as a leasing entity, and then they can optionally pass through some or all the value of that to the leasee, the customer. So they're not required to do that. So there are still EV lease deals that may not be passing through that tax credit, but it does open up to a wider range of vehicles outside North American production. And hopefully, as time goes on, we are seeing more automakers announce plans to manufacture vehicles in North America. So in the next few years, perhaps there will be less need for some of that kind of leasing workaround that's happening now.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was not aware of that leasing kind of particularity, so thank you. Do the Green Mountain Power $2K, so $2,000 incentive in Woodstock apply if you have a solar installation at your residence that is connected to the grid? I can answer this, but I'll let you go ahead.
Yes is the short answer. I believe if you're off grid, I don't believe the GMP, and in GMP territory, I don't think that they do provide that incentive, but if you're a GMP customer, you should be able to get that incentive.
Yeah, I can answer it so well because I am off grid. So anyone who lives off grid, you cannot get Green Mountain Power incentives. But as long as you are connected to the grid and paying Green Mountain Power some sort of money or have electricity from them, you're fine. The next question. For battery longevity, I hear that when using a fast charger, it is best to charge to only 80%. And when using an AC charger, it is best to do the same unless 100% is needed to start on a long trip. Is that true? If so, is it important?
It's generally true. So, the fast charging, once you get over an 80% state of charge on a fast charger, the fast charging will really slow down. They call it tapering. So you'll kind of be charging at a high power, and then as you hit 80%, that power will decrease, and that's to protect the battery. Things can get hot, and heat is the enemy of long-term battery health. So to avoid a lot of heat buildup, they start tapering the charge. So for most EVs, you do want to stop fast charging at 80%. The vehicle will slow down the charging. So if you know there's not another fast charger for quite a while and you really want to keep going with it, you can. There is some etiquette involved as well, though, because if you're at a fast charger and other people are waiting, it can be pretty frustrating for those other people if they know that you're past 80% and your charging time, you've really slowed down. So I'd say only do that if you really need to. For using a home, like a level 2 AC charger, typically, keeping the battery within sort of a 20 to 80% state of charge range is supposed to be the best for long-term health, but there are some circumstances, some different battery chemistries. So Tesla and Ford have some models that use a lithium iron phosphate battery instead of lithium ion batteries, and those do need to be charged to 100% occasionally. So my best advice here is to follow the guidance in your vehicle owner's manual. So check that, maybe check with the dealer to make sure you have the best information for a particular model that you're driving. I would say in most cases, the batteries are warranted for 8 years or 100,000 miles, regardless of whether you're charging to 80 or 100%. So it shouldn't be a huge impact on the battery health either way. But if you have that flexibility, you don't need the full 100% range of the battery. It is generally recommended to charge to maybe 80 and 90%.
Thanks,
and
Dave.
Most vehicles will have a way built in that you could set that charge limit.
Great. Okay. Our next question here. I read recently that Toyota is coming out in 2025 or 26 with a new battery that will have a 600-mile range. Why should I consider buying an EV now versus waiting a year or two for better battery technology?
Yeah, if you don't need a vehicle right now, you may want to wait a little while. It's because the technology is improving and the market conditions are still, it's gotten better, but over the last few years, there's been a lot of supply chain issues. So buying any vehicle, EV or gasoline, has been more challenging just because of the limited supply. So, if you're not in need of a vehicle and none of the EVs that are currently available in the marketplace are that compelling to you, then you know, waiting a couple of years, there'd certainly be more options. But I can say, I mean, one thing you could think about is maybe a 3-year lease. It's what a lot of EVs, it's what I've been doing myself for many years, is leasing, which will provide you access to all of the incentives, at least in some cases, depending on your income and eligibility and your vehicle. And you can turn that vehicle in after a couple of years, get a new one. That off-lease vehicle then goes into the used market, which is helpful to sort of seed more availability of affordable EVs. So it's really, sort of personal preference question. I think there are some good reasons to get an EV now in terms of reducing emissions and cost, but certainly if your current vehicle is working for you, there will be more options in the next few years. There will be, the federal tax credit should be around through at least 2032. The state incentives they're a little more uncertain. There's not a dedicated source of funding for those, so it's entirely possible that there may not be a state incentive program in a couple of years, depending on whether funding is available. The utility incentives, those are year to year. Hopefully those will still be around, but can't guarantee that.
That was my follow-up question. Thanks, Dave. Are the Kia, Hyundai, Toyota RAV4 plug-in hybrids eligible for federal tax credits? And that's a plug-in hybrid.
Right. So the short answer is the current ones that are out there, they're all manufactured outside of North America. We have a fact sheet that's linked at the bottom of the Drive Electric Vermont Any page. It's sort of in the bottom navigation footer. And this fact sheet has a listing of most of the EVs that are available, all electric and plug-in hybrid. And there's a column here that will show if there's a tax credit, what the amount is. So, there aren't many plug-in hybrids that qualify for the federal full $7,500 tax credit, just the Chrysler Pacifica hybrid. And then there's a couple that qualify for half. They meet sort of partial requirements for that federal credit. Again, if you lease, though, the lease company can qualify for a tax credit and pass it through. So Toyota has not been doing that, but Kia and Hyundai have started doing that with some of their lease deals.
Thank you. That's a great chart. I will send out the website to everyone who's on this call as well. Does Green Mountain Power still provide a charging station as an incentive?
Yes, thank you for calling that out. So GMP, if you're getting an all-electric vehicle, they no longer provide it with plug-in hybrids, but if you get an all-electric vehicle, they'll provide a free home charger, and that charger needs to be connected to a Wi-Fi network at your residence, and that gives GMP insight into when you're charging and allows you to access their off-peak rates, so it can save you some money. They do not pay for the installation of that level 2 charger, so they give you the equipment, but you're responsible for having that installed. So the equipment value is maybe $600–700 value, and then the installation costs can really vary depending on the situation in your house. If you have existing space in your electric panel to serve the load, might be $500, could be more, depending.
Thank you. And the last question I've got here, although please feel free to keep entering them, folks, is can you comment on the availability of the Micro Lino, which I honestly don't know what that is, so I will learn something.
That is a new one for me. I think it's, I'm just Googling quickly. So it's a very small vehicle, which has been made in Italy, I see. I do not believe it's available in the US. I have not seen one, to my knowledge. There are some what are called neighborhood electric vehicles, which are low-speed vehicles. They're street legal on roads with a speed limit up to 35 miles per hour. So there's a company called GEM, G-E-M, that has offered those neighborhood electric vehicles for many years, and that could be a nice fit for sort of campuses or getting around property and things like that. But I don't know, Carl, if you have any additional thoughts on the Microlino, but haven't seen them here personally.
Yeah, I just Googled that as well. Looks really interesting. Feel free to comment again, Carl. The next thing here is, does the Drive Electric Vermont website show what incentives might apply to leased vehicles?
So the incentive calculator, all of these incentives could apply to a leased vehicle, except the federal tax credit. You won't be able to claim that yourself because the leasing company technically owns it. So, but the utility and state incentives that you would see reflected in this incentive calculator, a lease will qualify for those, provided you meet the income eligibility requirements and the vehicle is eligible. We do have on the fact sheet that I was showing earlier, we try to track some of the lease information that automakers provide on their website. So these can change from month to month or even more frequently. So it's hard for us to really keep this super current, but we do have some information here. I would highly recommend, if you're thinking about a lease and trying to figure out what deals might be out there, you can go on the vehicle comparison tool. So for example, if I'm gonna look at a Chevrolet Bolt EUV, maybe I'll go to the manufacturer website from this vehicle comparison tool. And yeah, well, this might be a little bit slower than we want to do right now, but you can go to the manufacturer website. There's usually a build and buy or sort of special offer section in the menu on the manufacturer websites that will provide some information on lease deals. Also contacting a local dealer, another good way to understand what might be available.
Thank you. What is the lifespan of an EV in years or miles?
So for an all-electric vehicle, there's regulatory requirements that the sort of battery and powertrain have a warranty of 8 years, or minimum warranty 8 years or 100,000 miles. For a plug-in hybrid, there's actually a longer warranty period. I think it's 10 years or 150,000 miles. So, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that the battery will be in like new condition over that full period. So you can expect to see some degradation in the range. On average, you might see about 2% loss in battery range annually. So after 10 years, you might be down to about 80% of the original range of the battery. That can vary depending on the model vehicle, and for even within a specific model, how it's been treated over its life, where it's been driven, what sort of heat it's been subject to. So if you're looking at a used EV, would definitely always recommend having the battery checked out. And there's a company called Recurrent that offers some online tools to consider battery health, and they have some reporting on EV lifespan. But generally, most EVs that are on the roads have not needed battery replacements. There have been some battery recalls, not due to sort of normal wear and tear, but due to production defects where batteries have had to be replaced. But there are, we're getting more data, and hopefully in a couple of years, I'll be able to provide a more nuanced answer to the question. But, basically 8 years, 100,000 miles minimum, with some degradation, some loss of range expected over time.
Thank you. And I'm seeing here, Chris is asking, it may not exist since manufacturers are just entering this field, but is there a source for reliability ratings, repairs, etc.?
Yep, so Consumer Reports does some great work with EVs, so they are included in their ratings. So, might be worth a couple of bucks, or sometimes libraries might be able to provide access to consumer reports if that's a stretch. So definitely recommend them as a great resource for all manner of things related to vehicle purchasing. The Recurrent source that I mentioned has some information on battery health for different model vehicles, so it might be another source worth checking out.
Okay, thanks so much. That was our last question, and we are just about at 6:30, so that works out really well. Thank you very much, Dave, for joining us and answering all of our questions. I'll send out this recording to everyone who registered, and I'll send out a link to the website. And I think that's all I can think of now.